Welcome to the Diversity Project Pathway podcast. My name is Alexandra Ivanova, and I'm a fund manager at Invesco. Today, I'm so delighted to be talking to the chair of the Diversity Project, Dame Helena Morrissey. And the subject matter that we are going to discuss is very close and dear to me. It's about cognitive diversity in asset management. We have done very in-depth research recently, and we will talk about the details of how we've gotten into getting Alex Edmond to do this research. But the output of this paper is so powerful that I think we need to spread the word and let everybody in the asset management know about what we need to do to improve our inclusivity and diversity. So let's start. Tell me why and what's the background, why we did get to this question, that we needed to understand cognitive diversity and how to apply it specifically in asset management.
Thanks, Alexandra. Well, it's great to be on, and thank you for asking me to discuss this subject. So, in all honesty, this all started as part of our efforts to recalibrate the conversation about DEI. Clearly, there's been a lot of intense antagonism towards the subject, particularly led from the States. And for some time now, I think people associated it with Donald Trump's second term and the executive orders, but actually we'd seen this kind of backlash growing in intensity for at least a year and a half. So towards the start of 2024, I assembled a group of volunteers, and some were CEOs, some were CIOs, some were fund managers, and some people were DEI specialists, to discuss how we might reset the arguments. And we thought, actually, there's been a lot of criticism about identity diversity, and people have felt left out because it's been, you have to be a certain type of person to, that's perceptions anyway. The Diversity Project's never been like that, but that's the perceptions. And so we thought, let's go back to the real starting point, which for me was improving decision making. And I always was under the impression, partly through my own direct experience, that if you had diversity of thought, multiple perspectives, you were much more likely to get the best result, particularly in investment management. So we decided, after much back and forth, we wrote a briefing paper, because it's much easier said than done to work out what is the exam question. And we put this up over the summer last year, and invited submissions from academics around the world to do really robust research into what the evidence shows us about cognitive diversity and the performance of investment teams.
So how was Alex selected?
So we had 8 submissions. They came as far away as New Zealand. We had some from continental Europe, and very different suggestions being made by the different academics. Alex had the edge for a number of reasons. First of all, he had good understanding of the investment industry. I mean, he's professor of finance at the London Business School. He's not a diversity specialist as such, and we thought it was actually important that it was somebody who has a finance background and really understands the world of finance. He also is extremely compelling in how he presents. So some academics I know can be brilliant, but it's quite hard to get across the point. We wanted this to be practical. We wanted this so that people both working in the industry, like the pathway participants, but also firms, leadership, would read the report, listen to the conclusions, and actually implement change. And so we ended up with a short list of 2, and we interviewed with some of the things that we wanted to just check he was going to explore. And he was extremely compelling in those, and we are delighted that he agreed to do the research.
Very good. And it looks like it was worthwhile partnership between Alex and Diversity Project. And before we start, I want to kind of set the tone in terms of how do we define cognitive diversity? Because a lot of people confuse it with a lot of different types of diversity. So we want to make sure that we are on the same page. So
we just defined it very broadly as different ways of thinking. So this might be how you approach a problem. It might be obviously related to your skill set. You've been taught to think in a certain way. You're right, Alexandra, some people think of this as sort of neurodiversity. And obviously that's a type of different way of thinking, but we wanted to make this much broader. So this is just about, you assemble a group of people who have, there might be pessimists, there might be optimists, there might be people who are very analytical, people who are very big picture. These are what we mean by cognitive diversity.
And in asset management sense, I suppose when we are talking about performance or improvement in performance, is the intuition was before we actually started the research is that diversity actually does bring the improvement in performance, or is it actually just in our mind and the numbers don't really prove it?
So what Alex Edmonds' research showed was that, and he did two ways of approaching the issue, which is something I should have added to why we chose him, because he persuaded us that it was not relevant to do lots of primary academic research, which would be about exploring, a team of cognitively diverse people and then a team which didn't have cognitive diversity and see how each performed, which could take a decade to come up with something rigorous. So he looked at what was already out there. He said people had done a lot of studies into cognitive diversity generally, and then he looked at practitioner perspectives, and the two together actually confirmed your intuitive point that actually cognitive diversity can be extremely powerful and very, very relevant in terms of performance in asset management, and I can come on to why in a moment, but only if implemented well. And that was the punchline, really, that you can't just add diversity then stir. And I think that really helps to reset the arguments, because we could argue, I think quite sensibly, that sometimes, and I've done this myself, so this is a self-critical statement, people take the studies like, McKinsey's famous ones on diversity matters, which conclude that, you have better financial performance if you have, say, ethnic diversity or gender diversity on a board. But actually, people have criticized those. They said they couldn't restate the results, they couldn't replicate the results. What this showed was that, you can't just add a woman to a team and suddenly miraculously performance is better. It's much more about how she's able to contribute. Is there inclusivity? Is her input managed well? Does she get her voice at the table? So that, to me, is much more powerful and intuitive than just add a woman or a black person to a group and suddenly, yay, it's all much better. That just doesn't, I think that had put people off, or some people off.
So if we think about it, what do we think about the quotas? So sometimes you have these quotas, people say, we're going to have 50-50, or there is a 30% club for the board level. So and you set it up. And on one hand, you could say that without quotas, there's no way that we can get more diverse people into these roles. But at the same time, the backlash is you just add them and then miraculously the performance improves. What do you think about it?
So I think there's two arguments here. I set up the 30% club not with the legislation in mind. But, quota implies that people are required to do it for it's mandated. And I've always been opposed to that because I don't think women want to join a board because we're filling a quota to start with. But I wanted people to actually believe that it would improve performance, that it would improve the dynamic of the board, and that was all set up in the aftermath of the financial crisis. However, having targets in my mind, which sometimes do get confused with quotas, from a point of view of fairness and ensuring that you have representation, I think is valuable, just to keep us honest, frankly, in terms of, are we making any progress or not? And that was something I realized. Prior to the 30% Club, we were just holding events and talking about, for example, women's progress, but not actually measuring it. There is a separate argument. The report is obviously very much focused on cognitive diversity rather than demographic diversity. And what Professor Edmonds makes clear is that if you force demographic diversity on people, i.e. have a quota, that is unlikely to just by itself drive the right result. And so I think this comes back to this much more sophisticated, more nuanced, why are you doing it? I personally also want to make sure that we don't, in the midst of resetting the argument, so we don't lose sight of the need to make sure that underrepresented people have opportunity. So that's me personally, and I think that's more of a moral argument. The research does not suggest that you don't want to have demographic diversity. In fact, it's suggesting it's often a very good driver of cognitive diversity. But I think we do need to disaggregate. I'm trying to get diversity or meritocratic diversity. That's my goal here, and always has been. And I think it is totally compatible with setting some targets to make sure that you're not just saying you're doing this and actually you've got 90% men or 95% white people. You know, it's very important, or everybody's 50. You know, it's very important that we just keep an eye on what the demographics look like. But this report is a bit different. It's looking at, actually, let's make sure that we go back to the evidence and what drives performance. And I think it's quite compelling that it shows you want people with different backgrounds, different life experiences, and obviously men and women often, for example, do have different life experiences.
Views,
yeah.
So the setting of debate, for example, and ability to express your own opinions is very important, and that's probably the hidden jewel, I would say, that psychological safety. And we all talked about psychological safety in other settings, but I was really excited to see that within this the research, because that is exactly where the best ideas are born, right? And then debated, and then where people feel much more included, genuinely included, and appreciated for their values and their ideas. So is there an element of this research that surprised you?
Well, actually, it's slightly tongue-in-cheek to say this, but the real surprise was that there was such unanimity amongst market practitioners that they all pretty much said that they thought cognitive diversity was important in investment management, because normally, well, I struggle to find people that agree on anything in the investment industry, so slightly tongue-in-cheek. But I think it does, I think that the emphasis on skillful management, skillful leadership, creation of that psychological safety, that was an emphasis I was not necessarily expecting. I was thinking, no, you can't just add diversity then stir, but that a group of people who have different perspectives coming together, I don't want to say consort themselves out, but that was, I suppose, my bit more my intuition. And then it's clear from the research that you do really need to make sure that you are encouraging courageous views to come forward. And as you say, Alexandra, I mean, that's why it works so well in investment management, because often the outlier ideas are the winning ideas.
Yeah.
You're not going to outperform if you just have consensus views. So it's really critical that those outlier ideas can surface.
And also kept, because in a group setting you could also have debate very great ideas, but then if you set up in a way that it's free-flowing, just discussion, and then say at the end of it you have a vote, then you all congregate around the middle of it. So that's another argument for kind of having a diversity, but also being able to identify which one is actually a winning idea and how to implement it.
Exactly. And I just want to stress that actually when I was very much younger and I joined Newton Investment Management, I was hired by Stuart Newton, who's founded the firm, and he had built the whole investment philosophy on the concept that no one has a monopoly on great ideas. That was his slogan. And he, with hindsight, I wasn't necessarily aware of it at the time, he was this skillful manager that kind of could apply. He gave me the license and all of my colleagues to disagree. So I never felt I was going to get told off if I came up with a wacky idea. In fact, he encouraged, us to think more laterally than I think most people would have been encouraged at that stage of my career, certainly. But he didn't go for lowest common denominator. And that's the skill, because he didn't say, okay, you agree, you promoting this idea, you disagree, let's average it out and see where we get. Because we were very, at that stage, I don't know if Newton's exactly like this now, but this was when I was there, that it was very much a conviction-based investing. And so our job as investors was to persuade our colleagues that we had the right argument. So that did encourage a fierce, ferocious debate sometimes. And he was, I suppose, the umpire of those debates, but the goal was not to get to some sort of weak, consensus. The goal was to persuade each other. And that really was very powerful. I saw time and again how that would so often lead to the right result, because you had to be so confident in your answers and your arguments. And it was exciting. It was exciting as a place to work, and it was exciting as a relatively young fund manager at the time to be then given that opportunity to kind of grow and develop your conviction. So I hope that Pathway participants listening can sort of see, some of the elements of the course that we've been trying to convey around building your confidence. No one has certainty that your views are correct.
Yeah, but that was my point, because the whole idea we're making this decision and debate is because there is uncertainty, and we're always talking about the future, right?
Yeah.
So being able to articulate and being able to debate freely without fear of judgment is an amazing environment, and hopefully this research also highlights that if we are able to create that in many, many places, how much better the industry would be.
Exactly. And one of the things that I noted is that Alex Ivanova suggests that is critical for leaders to showcase their own mistakes or failures.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I think showing that it's a learning opportunity, that actually, a setback can be hugely important in terms of your thought process for what happens next. And I do think that would place the industry in really good stead to have, it's okay to fail, because you're probably going to learn from that, or you can learn from that, and then make a greater success for the next decision.
So to me, it speaks about how the middle management or the immediate manager has a lot of responsibility to be able to create this kind of environment. Of course, it can come from very top, and that is useful. But I think on day-to-day, it's the leadership that you have to work with has to have that kind of competitive edge, and I always think that the industry itself is very competitive. So if you want to have an edge over your competitors, maybe you need to think about training or making sure that you have good enough, inclusive, and intuitive, or people who are able to see laterally and create that environment for young fund managers, analysts. Is that
Yes.
Is that something that we should focus on?
Definitely. So we've obviously worked with Professor Emmons on the report. We're now being, as you said at the start of this conversation, socializing it, getting the word out there. Please, anyone listening who finds it interesting, read it, share it. It's important that the starting point that people sort of hopefully would recognize, what it's suggesting. But the next stage for the diversity project is to help our member firms to in a couple of areas. We've been having in the webinars and seminars that we've had, we've done polling, and it's fascinating. We've asked people, do they think they've had the right training to be a good leader, effective leader? Mm-hmm. And we've had ones that are more targeted at fund managers. We've had ones that are more targeted, sort of more general population, often middle managers. And on average, only a quarter of the respondents think they have had the right training. And in one particular forum, I won't embarrass the group by naming what is 0%. So they felt they had the right training to be effective leaders. Okay. So this is a priority for the diversity project. And we are assembling, we work through task forces now. We try to sort of solve problems with these task forces, so it's a mix of experts in that area, but also people who are very interested in the area. So we're assembling one on which the output will be what we're going to call masterclasses in skillful leadership, and we will target, in fact we had a conversation just yesterday about this, but middle managers will be one of our key target group, because most people report to somebody who might be described as a middle manager, and often I think they're not given the tools. People criticize quite often and say, it's the marzipan layer, nothing gets through, or it's a frozen middle, or whatever it is. They've got lots of horrible names. But the reality is they probably haven't ever been taught how to really get the best out of a team, how to harness the benefits of cognitive diversity, for example. So we are working now, as of now, on these masterclasses, and we'll be bringing them to our member firms as soon as they're ready. But it's important that we get this right. These need to be really sophisticated. This is not just another training course or something that you could roll out online. And so we will be taking soundings from a lot of people before they emerge. But that's our next
that's very
step.
encouraging, because in my own experiences, some managers are naturally talented, as you alluded to your previous boss. Some need a lot of training, because as we realize, we are all cognitively different, and all the managers are also different. So being able to capitalize on the team's talent and making sure that you create the synergies and create good results is very important.
And I think most managers in our sector, in investments, but also in many other sectors, I'll be honest, are promoted to that role because they're good at their day job. So they're good at managing money, so then suddenly they're managing a team. But it's not because they know how to manage a team. And so I think,
it's a very different skill set.
It is a very different skill set, and that's where I hope we can be of help.
So thinking about the participants at the Pathway program, right? Most of them will be juniors or coming up their careers, and they will be once part of this team. What can they do, equipped with this research, to improve their environment without necessarily antagonizing other members of the team?
So I think it is really important people recognize that you have agency, even if you are quite junior, and to not just wait until you're spoken to, even if that might be sort of your natural sort of tendency. Certainly was mine when I was starting out. And I found my voice after realizing that I was not being promoted the way I was. I mean, I was working incredibly hard. I had great results and I wasn't getting promotions. So I made myself, become more courageous. And I would encourage people listening to this. I mean, if you really feel that you can't input, then I would have a quiet word, with your manager and share the research and say, look, I feel I can add something. You don't have to say it in a pushy or aggressive or overly assertive way. But I think really people do value opinions if you have an idea, So try to find your voice and try to find your way within the team. I do recognize that in some firms there is still the vestiges anyway of a star manager culture. And this is something that Professor Edmonds draws out. People who you feel I could never question them because everyone hangs on their every word. And that I think is where it's particularly important. If you have a really strong idea, so I wouldn't do it frequently, but a really strong idea, in a very polite and constructive way to ask questions. I mean, you don't have to challenge, I think that's rubbish. You can start by saying, I've just thought, what about this?
Yes.
And I think people are very interested. You might feel no one's interested in your voice or your opinion, but actually once you express one and you have something interesting to say, then people will want to listen and they will give you more space. So create that opportunity as my advice if you can. And if you really feel you can't because of the culture or the nature of the team that you're in, then do speak to your manager about it.
So going back to the research, for you personally, what's the most important outcome of this? And maybe you can share very specific advice or a specific situation that one manager can take out of this conversation today.
Sure. So I think the most important thing it's hard to distill it to just one, but I do think it highlights that that meritocracy is completely compatible with diversity. In fact, as Professor Edmonds highlights, if you only hired from one sort of similar, say, educational background or skill set, you couldn't possibly have the best team. So this idea of recruiting for the team, hiring for the team, making sure that then you retain and develop people so you have cognitive diversity at all levels, it's not some sort of, nice to have. I posted on social media the other day about this work and someone said, aren't people more interested in the kind of nuts and bolts of life these days with all the terrible things going on? And I said, well, I'm just as interested in those, but I'm looking for solutions. And this report shows that cognitive diversity is a solution to problems. It's not another problem to solve. So if you could take one thing from it, is think about cognitive diversity as your friend, as your tool to succeed.
And compete and win.
And to compete and win, yes. And the other thing that I just want to emphasize is it shows as well that, because I think a lot of our own initiatives, the Diversity Project, but also more generally in the industry, have been about broadening access at entry level, which is great. But this research shows that then you've got to make sure those people are included. Arguably, inclusion is more important than diversity. And then you've got to make sure they stay and develop their careers. So don't just think, oh, I've done it because I've got a lovely diverse team from different backgrounds. It's like cultivating. I sometimes said when I was being a bit facetious, when I was CEO of Newton, I said, oh, the fund managers are like hothouse flowers. You have to kind of, water them very gently and guard them with spray them carefully, can't overdo things, can't have too hot, too cold. But it's true. It's a very subtle, and this is an art, this is something that I think I would love people to get excited about and think, I'm going to do that. I'm not going to just I'll do the performance review. That's my job as a manager. Your job as a manager is to cultivate your team to produce the absolute best outcomes for your clients.
I think that's an amazing output and a conclusion of this conversation and also the research. And I really hope people will take some very valuable lessons out of this and can change slightly their behavior that will also have impact. And then we see that within the industry, hopefully not in too distant future.
No, it's going to take a little while. I want to just add, if I may, Alexandra, one other point that when we've asked people, do you know how to measure cognitive diversity, only 12% of all these respondents in our different format of, webinars and so forth said they do. Mm-hmm. So the other task force that we're going to be working on is very much around helping people understand how to measure it, how to manage it, and also recognizing that you don't have the opportunity just to sort of, let's hire some new people to make my team more cognitively diverse. You have to work with what you've got.
Well, exactly.
So, and we're obviously conscious that we, in an era of a lot of economic uncertainty. So the idea first will be to help, that one I think will be somewhat easier. We've had an offer of help already around a tool to help people measure the starting point and then manage what they've got. And then this other work will be on, helping managers to upskill and to really make the most of cognitive diversity.
That's amazing. So hopefully the members of the Diversity Project will benefit from these new tools. And I'm looking forward to seeing that and getting some training and showing it to my team. And hopefully everybody who's listening will do that as well.
That would be great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for tuning in. And we will be releasing more podcasts. And please keep coming back for a great conversation.